This is The Accounting with Esteban Parsons. So let's talk about the Office of Inspector Generals. It's been in the news lately. Well, on January 24th of 2025, President Trump notified approximately 17 Inspector Generals that they were going to be fired. Now, some people have argued, was this even legal? Well, there are laws in the books that require the president to notify Congress and give reason for why he's firing, or she is firing, the Inspector Generals. And it's typically, I believe, a 30-day notice that's required by law. So some people are saying these aren't legal or what have you. Well, he could have just been giving them a heads up, hey, I'm going to notify Congress and you guys are going to be fired. So people wonder, why is this a big deal? Who are the Inspector Generals? Well, the Inspector Generals are tasked with overseeing government operations for their various departments and agencies. Now, one of the problems that we have seen is previous administrations, as they're headed out the door, will appoint certain people to certain positions, and those positions that those people are appointed to and are therefore working in and directing are then used by that previous administration to hinder the incoming administration. So it could be that's what Trump is doing. He's getting rid of the Inspector Generals who are political actors and who are there to thwart his mandate given to him by the voters. So it is my belief that he was just giving a forewarning that he is going to intend to fire him through the official process. And so that also begs to differ, or he's looking for the legal challenge. Is it legal that someone in the executive branch cannot be readily fired by the executive, the president? So if it goes to court, it'll be fought out in the legal battles, and the courts, ultimately the Supreme Court, will have to render a decision if it is, this 30-day notice is even constitutional. One could argue that it is not, because somebody in the executive branch is subject to the whims of the president on whether they should be fired, because the president is the chief executive of the country. So now that we've discussed the firings of these Inspector Generals, what is it that these offices do? These Office of Inspector Generals. Well, basically the Office of Inspector General is charged with the overseeing of a specific department or agency. For example, U.S. Agency for International Aid has their own Office of Inspector General, who is appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate. The U.S. Department of State, the State Department, has their own Office of Inspector General, who is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. Same with the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Department of Education, Department of Commerce. They have these Office of Inspector Generals. And the Office of Inspector General basically has two main functions with their oversight of federal agencies and federal departments. They conduct criminal investigations into wrongdoing by federal officials and fraudulent use of resources by contractors who contract with those departments, as well as federal employees who misuse those funds. And so these investigations are conducted by special agents who are classified under a series known as 1811, which are criminal investigators. They are the same type of special agent as what you would see at the FBI or the DEA or the Secret Service. They are classified the same way. They receive similar training, and they can conduct similar investigations. In fact, many of these 1811s can transfer from an Office of Inspector General to the Secret Service, to Homeland Security investigations. And so they conduct these investigations into criminal wrongdoing, fraudulent use of, or abuse or misuse of government resources, whether it be by a government contractor who wrongly billed the government in a mischievous and fraudulent manner, or through product substitution, or to federal employees who are misusing their resources and their positions for their own gain. And this is what these special agents do. And they work in conjunction with the Department of Justice, with U.S. attorneys for their respective districts. and they go forth, they execute warrants, they collect evidence, they conduct criminal investigations, they conduct criminal interviews, basically what you would see on the TV when an FBI agent or an NCIA agent does something. This is what these special agents with the Office of Inspector General does, but it's in relation to typically financial crimes, but sometimes other crimes. One crime they do a lot of is investigations of the misuse of government IT equipment to produce or disseminate or to view child pornography. The other function of the Office of Inspector General is to perform financial, performance, and cost type audits of their respective departments and agencies. For example, each department produces a year-end financial statement, just as every other government organization does: city government, county government, state government, as well as now government financial statements are slightly different than financial statements than what you would see coming from Google or Microsoft or Apple. But they are financial statements that have to be audited, and so the IG is charged with conducting these financial audits. And they render opinion as to whether unqualified opinion, a qualified opinion, or disclaimer opinion as to whether you can rely on these financial documents to correctly interpret the financial well-being of that department. As it is commonly known, the Department of Defense has routinely failed their audits or have been unable to be audited by the department, by the Inspector General. And it's not due to the Inspector General, it's just because the Department of Defense is just so horribly mismanaged and ran. Another aspect they do are cost audits. So they will go in and audit to make sure the costs are appropriate, that they are reasonable, and that they are not being misused in any way, shape, or form, such as purchasing equipment or funds or services that are illegal or not in the best interest or contrary to an existing appropriation law. They also do performance audits to make sure a program or a part of the agency or department is running efficiently and give recommendations of how to better run that department. And so these are the main core functions of the Office of Inspector General. They usually do some other minor stuff. They do a lot of stuff to check to see if the IT infrastructure is running appropriately, that they have proper security and safeguards to ensure secrets and matters of that. But the main core function, they also do some minor. They also do some other minor things, such as ensuring that IT infrastructure has proper security safeguards and firewalls in place to protect secrets, to protect the infrastructure and information of the federal government. And these are the functions of the Office of Inspector General. They have special agents as well as auditors, accountants, if you will, accountants who are trained in the art of auditing, who conduct these audits and ensure that your funds as a taxpayer be properly spent and properly maintained. So, we've talked about the OIG firings, we've talked about the structure of the Office of Inspector Generals, what they do. Now we need to talk about what are we going to do going forward. How are we going to better implement these necessary and vital tools of government oversight? First and foremost, Trump's already done it. He got rid of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion hirings. He got rid of that actually illegal program that many government agencies implemented. And so they've gone back to hopefully merit-based hirings. They've gone back to hiring employees that are qualified for their job, not just because of some characteristic that they have, but they are actually hired because these employees are able to do the job, that they're willing to pursue the audits, to pursue the findings, pursue the problems, and report upon them. They're willing to perform the investigations that are actually related to fraud, waste, and abuse. So he's done that. He's got rid of the DEI. What do we need to do going forward? We need to ensure that the inspector generals who he nominates are actually qualified for the job, that they're not just political hacks, that they aren't just lawyers who are political animals, but that they're people who are dedicated either as auditors or as law enforcement officials to finding the truth, to reporting upon it, to pursue what is necessary to create a more efficient government, and to pursue the fraud and the waste and the abuse. You can only do that really with auditors or law enforcement officials who aren't political animals. Additionally, for the audit side of the inspector generals, they need to find auditors or train the auditors so that they know the programs that they're auditing. I have found many times with Office of Inspector General auditors, sometimes they don't truly grasp the programs that they're looking at, or they grasp the fundamentals of a procurement operation from cradle to grave. They understand a very high level 30,000 foot overview of a program, but they don't understand truly the weeds of it. They aren't down in the brush, in the mud. They don't understand that as well as they should. And that's something auditors need to be trained on, that they need to put forth the effort to understand everything at the minute detail, not just a 30,000 foot, not even just a 10,000 foot, but down in the mud, in the weeds. You also have to ensure that auditors continue to receive training so that they can continue to hone their skills necessary to find the issues and to better understand, but not just that. They need to develop the skills to find the things that maybe not everyone's looking for. They need to look beyond the mark or beyond the facade. They need to understand the analytics so they can look at a set of data and say, yes, that looks okay, but what about this little thing right here? This one number buried in this haystack of numbers. Why does that exist? And they have to be able to understand that, to see it, and to want to pursue that thing so they can issue the audit report saying, hey, everything's doing really good, but we found this one number, and this one little thing really hinders the ability of this program to be as efficient as possible. You also have to make sure that your special agents are properly trained in the data analytics of accounting and of fraud investigations. And they need to develop a synergy not only with fellow law enforcement, but also with their auditors that they have within their organization. And finally, the auditors need to figure out better ways to write the reports. I'm just going to put it out there. Having written many audit reports myself, sometimes auditors, we like to get wordy. We like to get down in the details of accounting terminology and audit terminology. And we fail to sometimes forget that many people aren't weird like us. That they aren't as autistic when it comes to an amortization schedule or the finite realities of accounting for leases or how a G&A, general administrative expense and cost structure, how it can be intricately detailed. Many people, quite frankly, don't have the time to want to understand this. And so we as auditors and accountants, we need to better our reports. We need to not so much dumb our reports, but to make our reports more generalized to the public. I often think that we need to make our reports so easy that my 5th grader can understand them and be able to then take the information that I gave that 5th grader and share it in front of her class or his class. And that's what we as auditors and accountants need to focus more on with our audit reports. We need to be developing an executive summary that can be a 5-minute elevator speech to Joe Blow off the street. And so when we enter the elevator and Joe Blow is right here, we need to turn to Joe Blow, and Joe Blow's like, so you're an auditor? And we say, yes, I am. And he says, well, you definitely look the part because you look like a nerd. And I say, thank you. And then he says, So tell me about this audit report you issued. And I could go into the in-depth detail about how I did a statistical analysis and that how it's representational of the population as a whole, and how these costs don't truly represent what is being stated here. And this is because of I elaborate on my extensive vocabulary in auditing and auditing standards and accounting standards. And he turns and looks at me like, huh? How does that help me understand what you do? Or I could turn to him and say, and give him the 5-minute speech, and I say, well, basically the summary is this program is not running as efficiently as it can be, and if we implemented this type of thing where somebody looks at this a little extra hard, or we implement this policy, or we buy this product versus that product, we could save millions of dollars. And he says, then why don't we do it? And that's the key, that what we as auditors and what the inspector generals need to do when they create these audit reports is to summarize it into a less than a page, half a page, and something that a plumber off the street could understand. Maybe that plumber isn't an accountant. Maybe he's not, or she is not. And we need to summarize it so they can understand it, and so that they can brief others on it. And that's what the Inspector General needs to be able to do when he meets with a head of an agency, the Secretary of State or the Secretary of Defense, and he presents to him an audit report and says, Mr. Secretary, we found this issue, and if we implement this process, we could better the whole organization. And then the Secretary of Defense says, that was pretty quick and easy. Yeah, why don't we do that? And then he can order his underlings to implement that policy. Because many times the Inspector General issues a report and it has many recommendations, and they're great recommendations, but a lot of people don't understand it, or they just don't want to change it. And when you go to their higher-ups, the higher-ups are too busy to want to spend a whole day reading a 30-page audit report. Or they may not be as experienced in auditing and accounting as they should be. I mean, let's face it, everyone should be, because we accountants are super cool. And so we need to summarize it so that that person, that decision maker, can say, you're correct, Mr. Inspector General. We're going to implement this ASAP. Or the Inspector General, if the secretary or agency head doesn't want to implement it, the Inspector General can go to the President, who is a very busy person, who has many meetings every day and has to make critical decisions that can quite literally be life or death for millions of people, both economically and in the actual physical sense of life and death. And the Inspector General should be able to give him or her a 5-minute speech and say, Mr. President, if we did this, we could save this much money. And this is why this thing would work. Why this recommendation is so important. And they should summarize it so a 5th grader could understand it. I'm not downgrading plumbers or secretaries or even the president saying that they're 5th grader, but if we could summarize it down to a 5th grader, they can then relate it to other people in a much more quicker and similar fashion. Another thing why we have to do this is because Congress, who is the holder of the purse strings, can hold the agencies accountable and can implement the legislation necessary to have those agencies implement the recommendations. For example, an audit report gets issued, the Inspector General goes to the President, goes to the Secretary or agency head, and they refuse to implement it. But you know for sure that if we implemented this, it could save us millions and millions of taxpayer dollars, or it could prevent the wasteful spending and fraudulent expensing of millions of taxpayer money. And so you give it to the senators and congresspeople, who themselves could possibly be very busy. They get the 5-minute elevator speech, and they say, hey, this is important. Let's write a bill that requires them to implement this process. Or they can also bring in the agency head and department or secretary and grill them in a session, in a committee meeting. That's why auditors and accountants need to to be very wary when they write the reports. Yes, they need to have the in-depth, detailed 500-page report that goes into every intricacy of accounting that we learned in our intermediate series of external reporting and during our audit classes, where we go into in-depth knowledge of statements of auditing standard number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so on and so forth. We need to have the report say that, but we need to, at the very beginning, be able to summarize the report so a 5th grader can understand it. If the IG implements these things, if President Trump pushes these things on the Office of Inspector General, we could truly see the Office of Inspector Generals be a change, be a reform agent over government agencies and cabinets and cabinet departments. And we could see them truly bring about the elimination of fraud, waste, and abuse in the federal government. I'd like to thank you for this time, to listening to The Accounting with Esteban Parsons, and grateful for your time watching this, and hope that you stay tuned for our next video where we provide The Accounting.